I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly. I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name's Jeff Cook. I'm a philosopher in Greeley, Colorado, and with me is TJ Wilson, businessman, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
My man.
Hey.
We are with one of our favorite people in the world. The great Schewee is with us again.
Yes, welcome back.
Thank you. So good to be back.
For those of you who do not know, Joey does legit professional Enneagram work, both with corporations and does work with her husband on parenting. So on both these fronts, and super excited to have her back. And we're talking about something I've first heard in your work, Joey. I don't know if you took this for somebody else or if this is original to you, but we're talking about processing centers today.
As far as I know, that came from me. I mean, I didn't pick it up somewhere. It was something I had to come up with in corporate America because I have not found, prior to talking about processing centers, a great way to address 3s, 6s, and 9s. I think there's so much lost when you say, that TJ's doing repressed and doing dominant. That it doesn't cut it, especially when you're trying to work with people in corporate America. So processing seemed really obvious to me.
Yeah.
Love that.
Enneagram is already kind of a bizarre theory to start out with. And if doing repressed and doing dominant, that doesn't sell.
And simplify, right? I think I definitely come at it in corporate America with, I've got a shorter amount of time to do this. Simplify. So.
Bang.
I'm also curious, what's the ratio of amount you got from your experience working with corporations and in the business world versus watching your husband for 20 years?
When it comes to 9s, man, watching my husband for 20 years takes on most of it.
I hope that that's not just unique to the three of us. It seems like there's, actually, it appears that you get a chance to work with lots of different people and learn more about Enneagram, given the variety of people that you work with. I think you're fairly unique on this front. I don't know a lot of people working with large swaths of people.
Absolutely. And what's really cool about that, honestly, is they're not seasoned in Enneagram. So what you're getting is just true, this is me without the lens of Enneagram. So I get to apply the lens before they even realize that's what's being applied.
Right.
And without a lot of the sort of spiritual baggage that comes along with a lot of the other communities that are studying the Enneagram.
I love that word because that's the best word. It is baggage. I think when you put the spiritual piece in, while the upside is huge, it also adds on the downside, and it's because of the baggage.
Yeah.
The subjective view of spirituality is fascinatingly broad. And when you take that piece away, then you're really just looking at what are these centers of intelligence. Let's just cut to it and look at which one we're using, in what order, and where are we leaving one behind, basically, or two, depending on who we are.
Well, I teased it as we're talking about processing centers. There's a handful of different sets of triads, different ways you can carve up the Enneagram circle into 3s. And this is a fantastic one, a tool that we've, TJ and I have done some work on after our conversation with you on our own, and just love the potential here. So just fresh eyes, how would you define processing center?
So the way I like to come at it in corporate America is I start with triads. So our just gut, head, heart. I like starting there because when you look at the Enneagram symbol, which, as you two can imagine, can be off-putting in corporate America, but it's important. And I say it's super important for the beginning of the conversation because you have to visually see how the centers are connected, because we're connected. And those lines that connect us are so much more than stress and secure lines. They're what carry us to the other centers. And so I always start with looking at the Enneagram. I kind of create a pie chart, if you will.
Yeah.
And to talk about it without having a visual, it's an upside down peace sign, kind of, without, the line going down the middle. It's that pie at the top is doing in the 8-9-1 space. Feeling and heart is in the 2-3-4 space, and thinking, logic, head, that's in the 5-6-7. So I start with pie chart without any lines, so that they can really start to see we've all got this made up in us. It's just a matter of how and when are we accessing those centers. And I think it's so important to start with triads, even though you two both know how much I love stances and I teach in stance order. I think triads is important for 2 reasons, especially when you're looking at what we end up processing with. Triads is important to look at what I call our home base, because even 3s, 6s, and 9s who don't process in their dominant center, that triad, that center where they start, their home base, that determines what fuels them. And the way I say it is I have listed values for each of the centers of intelligence, and your home base determines your values. And we can value elements from every center of intelligence, and many of us do. You'll know it's your dominant center or your home base if those are the values that influence your daily decisions. And so the 3 of us, we are all in that doing space. And so even though you and I, Jeff, we process with doing, TJ joins us in being fueled by that anger, right? It's there for him. And I'm super aware, being married to my husband for 21 years, that he thinks a lot about doing. Mm-hmm. He's processing with thinking, but most of his mental energy is about tasks and getting things done.
Or how to avoid them.
Oh, either way. Yeah. It's you're mentally working through it one way or another.
Yep.
Applying later to everything most of the time.
I love this the Intelligence Center is exactly that. I like the language of home base because it seems like all the other activities jump from that. My language, or our language, has consistently been that we are receiving the world through the head, heart, or gut. Processing isn't reception. It feels like it's one step further. And I don't know if you can conceive of how that works in your mind, but I would love to hear how that kind of fits as you're receiving the world through your body. What happens for you and me that's different from what happens for TJ there in the body triad?
Love it. Just to start with body and doing, all 3 of us have the same home base. The other term I like to use is filter. We all have the same filter. So the initial filter is doing for all 3 of us. So we come up to a situation, all 3 of us, as an 8, a 9, and a 1, and because doing is our filter and it's our home base, we see that something should be done. Like, that's a quick read for all 3 of us. Jeff, you and I, as a 1 and an 8, we then process with doing and action. So we roll up our sleeves immediately and get to work, while TJ shifts to thinking. And he sits back with thinking and observation and says to himself, someone should really do something about this. So the awareness is there, but the action is not.
Is processing then connected with solutions?
It is
Could
for 8s
be.
and 1s.
Yeah, I don't think everything requires a solution. So I guess what I would say is it takes in with doing, but the processing part is, what do you do next? Like, I think that's the better word, because not everything requires a solution. It's just, that's a very doing thing for you to say.
Yeah.
Doing dominant, right? But it's it's what you use to move forward, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah. I have thoughts on this, but what do you think, teacher?
Well, I've been thinking about like the second half of this question is like our language is that you take in the world through your primary center and you engage the world from your stance. And so withdrawn, reactive, aggressive. The processing center seems to me like the step in between, which for 8s and 1s is still about doing, but for 9s, it's now we took in the world through our body, through like the sort of active part of us. But before we decide what needs to be done, we need to process it. We need to figure out like what is the right step, what actually needs to be done here before we move to the place of engagement, and then we just go take a nap because we've spent so much energy thinking about it. But like that, I'm not sure if it's right yet, but as I've been going through this, it seems like that processing is sort of in between taking in and putting out.
That's where my mind goes. I would love to float this your way, Joey, that it feels like with our intelligence center, it's almost like we're taking in raw information, but we lean towards the head, heart, or gut there. But there's no values yet. It's just, this is how I experience the world. It's when values come in. Am I good in the world? Comes in through the processing is how I suppose I would want to state this. So if I'm processing through action as a 1, the physicality, the internal focus for me arises is, am I feeling like I'm good in the world? And I know that by what I'm doing and what I'm experiencing in terms of my actions. All of that is colored with values for me as I'm thinking through it personally. So I don't know if that applies to all the other numbers, but that's been my thought in terms of trying to get my head around this. Do you got thoughts?
That's an interesting way to look at it, because when I think about 8s, 9s, and 1s, where I don't think separate from each other is how much we value justice.
Right.
And so I almost wonder, rather than it being a separate thing, almost we carry it with us, the values, what we carry it with us. Because I, for sure, Jeff, when you just described doing for you, I know I'm doing a good job. I'm not doing it to be valued.
Right.
And likely, I wonder how much I'm doing sometimes to be against. Like what popped up for me was motivating need there as well. So when I think about, I'd love to hear it for you, but I think about TJ, how much of your thinking is about avoiding? You know?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's like, what is figuring out the easiest path from here to there? Like, what is the shortest distance between 2 points? And like that influences my driving. That influences so many things in my life. It's like I don't care as much about the reality of the shortest distance of 2 points, but I care about the theory of it often.
What went through my head, just to stick in the body centers, is that the focus of my value judgments is moved internal, and I would imagine that for 8s it's external. I imagine your actions in part are going to be, am I vulnerable in this space? Do I have agency? I feel good if I have the autonomy that I desire externally. And for me, it moves inward. And for a lot of ones, it can be really severe in terms of, do I have full control and mastery over myself? And I know that if I'm able to do the things that I want to do internally, can I, so for a lot of ones, it might be, can I control my weight, or can I control my language, or, do I have these habits of some sort? And I imagine am I wrong, TJ, if you're processing with thinking, it's going to be at both directions.
Yeah.
For the, so as you were talking, that's what I was hearing as well.
Well, and I love TJ's language theory. Like that struck a chord with me, because I think that goes right into the thinking center.
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure. I think 7s and 5s, love theory.
Yeah.
If you look at the two who are both processing there with you. So
Yep.
I like that.
Bang.
I know I had a thought prior to us talking about this, in that if you were going to separate, right? If home base is the same and what does processing look like, where is that delineation for the people who, for the 3, 6s, and 9s who shift? So the way I was thinking about it was, Jeff, I feel like you and I think 1s and 8s, we trigger is so overused. So I'm not, I don't mean to overuse it, but it's like that's what triggers me when things aren't done well.
Okay.
And I don't think it triggers 3s or 9s, but 9s have shifted away. When you look at 3s who come up and it's not their home base, it's where they move. I think there is where there's so many similarities with 8s, 1s, and 3s as we process, because it's not the home base of 3s. I don't think 3s care so much how it's done. But Jeff, I know you and I really care.
Yeah. Just as a footnote, the 3 is going to shift into processing with action, where TJ as a 9 is shifting to processing with thinking. So that,
But they're like to what you're saying, Joey. The 3, it's less about if it's done well and more about if it looks like it's done well. Like there's an efficiency piece that like we need to make sure that this gets through the process. Not necessarily that we're doing every step correctly, but like we want it to have the appearance of done well.
And
you can cut a
appearance
lot of
comes
corners
from
that
there.
way. Yeah.
Right. And appearance for what? What's the point of appearance? Someone else looking at it.
Yeah.
Right. So that leans to their home base, which is not just feeling and emotion, but remember, I really drive home that's the people-centric center.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's, does it look good to other people?
Yep.
yeah, would that be it? It's Joey, you and I, as an 8 and a 1, are assessing not relationally, whereas the 3 is assessing their actions relationally.
Mm-hmm.
And so, TJ, my question then is, if you moved counterclockwise, then would it be true? And when you look at 5s and 7s, it seems to me that they're almost both dismissive when the logic is not there. But I don't find 9s to be as dismissive. I find that you have loads of positive presumption, meaning that's what would separate you while you process with logic and observation like 5s and 7s. When the logic isn't there, I don't think it agitates you like it agitates 5s and 7s.
I need you to expand on that a little bit more.
If you don't have a logical argument, a 5 will not engage with you,
Sure.
period.
Yeah.
The way I look at it is, if you're coming with emotion, 5s and 7s don't have much to give you,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
either one of them.
Yep.
And while I think emotion drains you, I don't quite think you're as dismissive of it
Right.
as 5s and 7s tend to be.
I agree. I think that from our perspective at the top, at the crown there, we like the idea of seeing two sides or seeing multiple sides of everything. Like, logic is really important, and that is sort of like that's how we process. But also, it may not be the only answer, because someone else's feelings is important too, and sometimes feelings supersedes logic.
Said no 5 or 7 ever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so then if we don't have a 6 or a 3 in the conversation, but when you look at then 2s and 4s, I tried to carry it throughout. They both stay in process with feeling and people awareness. And I don't believe 6s get as worked up when people are mistreated quite like 2s and 4s do. Like, I'm trying to think of those hot buttons for 2s and 4s, and it's relational hot buttons, right? And it seems like 6s acknowledge it, but it's not going to derail them like it's going to derail 2s and 4s.
That's not a justice-oriented reaction, though, yeah.
No, I can't imagine that. I really think justice is the hot button for 8s, 9s, and 1s.
Sure. I meant it more as what is the hot button then for 2s and 4s if there's... what I was hearing is that mistreatment is on their radar.
Of people. I think any kind of mistreatment of people, when I think of, that's my mom and my son. Like they're almost hyper vigilant and hyper aware of the smallest personal slights for others, not always themselves, right?
Right.
But I don't think sixes, that's not where their feelers are, if you will.
Yeah. So but it's not this needs to be made right. This needs to be fair. It's I care about this person.
Yes.
I have a connection. Is it that I see myself in them? Is it what might be a language that distinguishes 2-4s, their relational desire to defend others or empathize with others that's different from justice?
I think it's an empathize. It's interesting to me, Jeff, that's you're such a doing processor that even this conversation, the next step for you is, well, they're going to do something about it. I don't think so.
Sure, they're going to sit back
Right?
and just feel their
because we're back
pain.
in processing with doing, right? But I think they're just aware of it and they're feeling about it. They've got all sorts of feelings about it. Doing is not part of that though, because that's not what they process with. But I think 3s would do something about it.
Correct, right?
I think the image piece comes in there, right?
Yep.
I think 3s are going to do something about it if image is tied to it. I think you can't get away from that.
Yeah. Might be a dilemma in their head of whether or not they can stand up for the person.
And whether or not
They'll
it'll look bad for them.
Yeah. Will you be socially
Yes.
shunned?
Yes.
Bing, that's a good introduction. And anything that we missed in terms of just the big idea of processing center? Before we're going to go around the circle, talk about each of the types, kind of unpack this a little bit more.
I think it's important, and we don't have to be on the same page, but because 3s, 6s, and 9s shift, I don't believe they have a defined or even a well-defined support center like the other types have. And I think would be germane for the conversation.
Yeah, we had brought that up in our last conversation that 3, 6s, and 9s in your mind don't have a secondary center, a support center. We consistently use the word secondary center, but because of that, there's some positives and some negatives, I suppose, on this front.
Absolutely.
You're talking about lack on that front. What are the 3, 6, 9 going to lack because they lack a support center?
Well, the initial lack is you hit imbalance first. If you're a 3, 6, or 9, while we're all dealing with imbalance, 3, 6s, and 9s hit the hurdle first because you don't stay with home base to process. You shift. And so my language is I believe that 3s double down on action. Whereas, so they process with action like you and I do, Jeff, but Jeff, for you, you're not on the triangle. Your line to 4 means feeling, supports doing for you. Right. My line to 5 means thinking, supports doing for me. Then you've got 3s who are just, it's fake it till you make it. It's if this isn't working, I'm not going to stop and think. I'm not going to stop and read the room. I'm just going to push it harder, ultimately, because what I know that I know if I'm a 3 is I can make this happen. So same with 9s. I think 9s think for too long and observe for too long, ultimately. And I think the hamster wheel that we've talked about with 6s, when they get on a hamster wheel in their mind of the what ifs and the yes buts, that's all subjectivity. That's doubling down on subjectivity. They've abandoned logic and they're not doing anything yet. So they're going to stay in that subjective view until they essentially get their heart where they're comfortable with it. Because their mind's always going to come up with another scenario and they're not ready to do yet. So that's what it looks like there. So the downside, right, would be that you're rocking with 1. That's kind of what I say. The upside is you're the only 3 that are interconnected. Like that triangle means you can move both ways. Is the way I view it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can just shift faster through the centers of intelligence. So instead of having what I picture it is, I picture every other number reading from the top down, meaning you just start with head, then obviously your support center, look at it visually, supports whatever your dominant center that you're processing with, and then you have to reach ultimately for that third one. Mm-hmm. I think 3, 6s, and 9s, I picture them standing head to toe with one center and both arms are reaching for either center. And it depends on the situation and their self-reflection. And it's more up to them, I think, Like, I think it's more of a natural move.
You're talking about reaching for your repressed center in this.
I'm talking about reaching
Situation.
for repressed and whatever the other one is. It's hard to say, right? Because if you say what's dominant is repressed, for you and I, we reach for our repressed.
That's what I meant with
Yes.
with the hexad numbers.
Yes.
We reach for our repressed center. With
Absolutely.
the harmony triad in the center 369, they have equal access, and yet the reach would be into their own intelligence center. Or is it a reach?
I think it's still. I think it's a reach back to home base, but it's also a reach to the what's last for them.
Yeah.
So that's. I don't want it to be confusing, but I think it's important to say you're shifting to that center, and it's the center at the end of your stress line, but it is not a stress move for 3 6s and 9s.
Right. Yeah. We've used the term doubling down as well, specifically when it comes to our stress move for 3 6s and 9s, because it seems to me that both 3 6s and 9s, when stress hits and they engage their coping style, what they're doing is they're shutting down their intelligence center even more. So 3s are going to solve problems by shutting down their feelings even more. And 6s are going to solve problems by shutting down their thinking even more. And 9s are going to solve problems by shutting down their physicality.
They're doing
even
in
more.
action even more. I love it. I think that's very well said.
So it's good that those run together. Anyway, I'm gonna. I love that as a positive because I do think that it's worth naming as a positive that 3 6s and 9s, that ability to balance. It's a little bit. It seems to me it's just more available as I think through those types.
Well, and it just gives you, there's everything in the Enneagram, right? There's two sides to it. Like there's nothing we get. Our gift is also can be our Achilles heel. I say, our superpower can be our kryptonite. Mm-hmm. I think that's what's happening. It's the other side of the coin for the triangle numbers for the primary types is, man, you don't get two. You're rocking with one, but you can move to the others faster.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about the lady in the water, the guy with the one arm that's overly worked out, and the other arm is just normal, but the one is just like this huge, ridiculous, bulky arm. And, for most of life, that's a ridiculous thing. He has to walk around with that. His shirts don't fit right. Like all of the things about being that lopsided. But, that one time that he's got to use it, man, it's there.
He was ready.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love that movie. It's my favorite M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Nice.
Yeah.
I know so few people who actually like that movie.
It's all about your purpose, finding your purpose.
Good.
So good.
I love that movie.
I'm a big fan of. Well, shoot, what is it? The Forest, the red color one.
Village.
That's my favorite. The Village.
Village.
Thank you. That's good stuff. All right, well, we're going to go around the circle. We're going to start with 2s. It seemed to me that 2s would be kind of a good entry point. We won't have to worry about that shift, but as was said, 2s are in the heart center, and they're going to process with feeling. So specifically just elevating the idea of processing center. Joey, what do you see with 2s here?
It's all about relationships. It is all about relationships. And when you look at feelings specifically, you have to highlight the reality that 2s don't feel what they're feeling. They feel what you're feeling. So they're going through not only with the feeling filter. So that's what's out. They've got their own little feelers out, but it's specifically for what are you feeling? Because I'm uneasy with what I'm feeling. I don't want to go there. Let me keep the focus outside on you. And it's fascinating for me to watch 2s who are doing so much of the time because that's what supports the feeling they picked up from someone else. Mm-hmm. Right? So it starts with that. Meaning 2s wouldn't do the majority of what they do if they didn't come across that person on that day and pick up that feeling.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, like 2s bringing in the feelings of other people, and that's sort of like the information they're out for, and the point of that information is about relational value. It's like, how are we connected? How do you feel about me? What can I do to support to make you feel better, to like all of the information is being processed in a way that the point of it is about the relationships. And so when they like the next step, the sort of doing space, like it, I know twos who sort of almost brag about not being logical, and like it's because the planning, the organization of that information doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the way that we're connected to each other, and that feeling filter. So what's to do to make these feelings more, grow them, resolve them, fix them, whatever. Like it's all about that relationship place.
I don't think you can say those things, make that acknowledgement without acknowledging the reality that twos have no line to the thinking center.
Right.
And that, so I love when Enneagram just explains, like that map explains, oh, that's why, you know, and it was hard for my mom to hear. Like it took her a while. I mean, we were on a trip together and I was like, Mom, you just have no logic. And she'll still kind of bring it up, but now she's embraced it. Like I hear, we were just in a meeting the other day and she was like, I have no logic. and it's almost like once you accept it, it's not you're incapable of it. It doesn't factor into your daily decisions.
Yeah. And all twos should also hear that doesn't mean you're dumb or you don't think.
No, this has nothing to do with that.
It's not part of the filter.
What I'm hearing there, it's the one-armed man analogy again, is if twos are taking in the world through their heart, and then again to offer the question, processing center is about whether you feel good. And so responding to the emotions of others is going to give you the answer of whether you're feeling good. And you're taking that in through your emotional core. Just like eights have that energy going outward, and we'll talk about fives in a minute, but it feels like that's how that works for twos. The I feel good move ends up having something to do with how they're connecting relationally. And I loved in your initial language, Joey, it was the stance came in as I was hearing it. I think the action that you see in twos of responding to the feelings of others comes in terms of how you're going to engage the world. So you've taken in the world through your heart, you've processed whether or not you feel good based on other people's emotions. And then if things aren't going well, then it's okay, how can I help? How can I do something such that I gain the connection that I really crave from others?
Absolutely. And I think this is the clearest place where you can see relationship being such a factor. It influences doing and mental energy for twos. It's not like I was having a conversation with a two recently, and we saw the exact same situation very differently, because her take was that it was a result of the relationship.
Right.
And that didn't even occur to me. Relationship didn't occur to me because that's last for me. But that is not just the filter for twos. It's how they process everything they're taking in is with the relationship. And I don't think that can be overstated enough, that reality with twos.
That's where I want to double down on this in terms of that's for me where processing center comes in. Is the world okay? How do you know that the world is okay? Is going to get answered in that space. And so, like, if the whole world was blowing up, and yet the two has their people, and their people are connected, and their people love them, you know what? Everything else will probably take care of itself.
That reminds me of a podcast a live stream we did with Mom in COVID. And as a two, like my brother, my 7 brother, you know, we were talking about his struggles coming from the thinking center, my struggles as an 8 because doing was so limited. And my mom was like, as long as my people are okay,
Copacetic.
Yeah.
And even like in that space, like your mom has talked about how difficult things were just her and Joe at home, because he was the, let's say, benefactor of all of her energy, and like that, like as someone who needs to bring in the world, filter everything through relationships, if you don't have interaction with other people, the world's not okay. And I think I can easily see that being a big part of why someone like your mom would sort of be the center of a bubble in a pandemic.
Absolutely. And I'm going to give Mom that language. She's going to love you, TJ, so she can just remind my dad that he's the benefactor.
Yeah.
Just for those who don't know, Joey's mom has an Enneagram podcast that TJ and I are a big fan of, and so that's why we know some personal stories here. Yeah. Anything else on twos?
Since we're going to talk about support and processing and support, I think we might as well throw in reach, right?
Okay.
And so I would say the reach for twos is not logic, just because that's not where the line is. So I say that if you don't have all three connected by lines, then it's a fourth step for you, is the language I like to say. And I absolutely believe that for twos, logic is very accessible, but I don't believe it's accessible until they go through 4 and they engage in solitude and introspection and decide what they feel. And then I think once they know what they feel, it puts a thicker screen on absorbing what everyone else feels. And then I think logic that's the fourth step.
Okay, so just to unpack that, you think that the access for twos into their head goes through their having to get comfortable and be secure so that they can engage feeling their thoughts at in 4 space.
And I don't think they can get comfortable. It is the secure move is 4, but I think it's twos hear that the 4 is their secure move, and they're like, I don't want to be alone with my own thoughts and decide that doesn't feel secure to me at all. No thanks. So it's what comes after you get over the hump of you need to be alone. I have had twos for the last 20 years of my life in teaching tell me that they had like life-changing moments when they took a trip by themselves. Because they were forced into that introspection.
I'll think on that one. I suppose the place my mind goes in terms of the security move is that when you have gotten the love and affection that you need and desire, your tank gets kind of filled up such that you have permission almost to get into isolated space. I suppose that's how I read it, but it may be the case that, all of us have our addictions. Maybe that's overly optimistic that your tank could ever get full for the 2.
I like that. And I think we have to acknowledge twos aren't just chomping at the bit to be alone unless they're exhausted. Right. Yeah. And alone, solitude and introspection twos doesn't mean going to sleep.
Well, so on the I suppose in my mind, the other place that you can get the head would be in your stress number. Do you think that twos can access thinking in 8 space in a similar way, in a 4th step?
If you look at my definition of truly drawing from thinking is when you're being logical and observant. Mm-hmm. I would say what I think twos access from 8 that looks like logic is total confidence in their doing. Mm-hmm. And that looks like logic, but that doesn't, and where you can see it's not logical is they're going to confidently do for you until they are run completely down. So what I say is the most obvious way to see that twos lack logic is their lack of personal boundaries. Because what you get, who has the best? 5s. 5s are doubly logic. They have they're the most personally boundaried. TJ, as a 9, you're very personally boundaried. 7s have no problem saying no, or even just not, saying no with words or not showing up. Right? Boundaries are easier when you've got logic on board, and so I think it can look the confidence of a 2 doing for someone else can look like it was well thought through because of that confidence, but I don't necessarily think it's logical.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's a great answer.
Agreed.
All right. Move to 3s. 3s processing. All right. So now we're going to do the shift. So 3s are taking in the world through their heart center. They are not processing through their heart, though. They're processing with that shift towards the body. So, you want to unpack that for threes?
Honestly, I think doing this work in corporate America and looking at threes specifically is what got me on this idea
Yep.
that they shift, that 3s, 6s, and 9s all shift. And what I've said always before realizing that there was a shift to process is 3s are in the same stance as 8s. So I'm a doing processor, but I'm also, and so are you, Jeff, but 3s are in the same stance with me. And what I've said always before I did this thinking is 3s have it all over 8s because they have more finesse. They have more savvy than 8s do because they read the room, because their filter is people. They just have something that 8s lack when it comes to the doing. And so then I was like, they don't do that with their thinking. Like, it's action oriented. And so they absolutely have the home base of people and relationships and have a relatively high EQ on the front end. Like, I would say my thought is the numbers who actually process with feeling, 2s, 4s, and 6s, celebrate the highest EQs ultimately. And I would say that, Jeff, you have a higher EQ than even a 3 because you don't stand independent from it. Like, your reference points outside of you. And yes, a lot of your feelings are those private emotions that surround the inner critic. But at the end of the day, if you can visualize the shift, visualize those numbers shifting. So the 3 ends up at the top of the Enneagram and the 6 is on the right side and the 9 is on the left with thinking. If you drew a line, and I have when I'm teaching, down the center of the Enneagram, right down the center of that circle, then you have a divide, and it's a very clear divide that 3s uniquely straddle. So 3s are the only ones that have a foot in feeling and a foot in thinking while they're doing. 1s, 2s, 6s, and 4s, it's all doing and feeling wrapped up. And 7s, 9s, 5s, and 8s, it's all doing and logic wrapped together. And so I think when you really look at that shift, it explains why 3s aren't necessarily, once they read the room, they've put that away to do. It doesn't factor in anymore. Yep. But neither does logic. And 3s don't love to hear that because things work out for them all the time. And I remind them, because it works for me too, we move so fast and think so fast and process so fast. That's 3s, 7s, and 8s. Mm-hmm. That for 3s and 8s, we process with doing first and not thinking. And so we trick ourselves often that we thought something through when we didn't. We jumped right in with both feet and just started doing. And if something came up we didn't consider, we adjust in stride.
Yeah. And
adjusting in stride does not mean you thought it through to begin with.
Yeah, it's interesting that, like, to think about reframing, and like 7s and 3s are the big reframers, but 7s reframe their thoughts and 3s reframe their behavior in action, or like in stride. I like that you're saying that this 3s and 8s move so quickly that, like, it's almost like you kind of can't see failures because it's already so far behind you that you can easily trick yourselves into thinking that you thought things through, that you did the right thing, that yours was the best plan of action, just because it's the only one that got on the table because you put it there and then left.
Right.
Yeah.
And our orientation to time is the future, so we're not thinking back. We're not going to look back on that.
Right.
What I heard was circles back to what we were saying about 2s and 4s and being empathetic. I think 3s are empathetic at the beginning, and then the processing center kicks in, and that's where empathy shifts, because what they value at that moment moves, and what they value is winning or then appearing to be successful. So they've read the room with the empathy, and then there's the pivot.
Love it. Because I think empathy is feeling what the other person feels, and there's no time for the 3 to do that.
Yeah.
So
'Cause that's
what
going
I've
to get in the way of winning.
Right. And what I've historically said, especially if I'm working with someone who I think might be a 3, I bring up the example of, because your filter is feeling and people and relationships and emotion, you can read feelings in others really well. And you will notice someone's not okay. And as a 3, you say to that person, I notice you're not okay. And then that person says, oh my gosh. And they want to then process their feelings with you. And as a 3, you can't back up fast enough.
Right. Yeah.
Because you can't, if you can do something about it, great. But if someone wants to just sit and process feelings with you, you cannot do it.
So this is where the feeling repression is going to kick in, because as they respond to the world, they're going to be in the assertive stance or the aggressive stance, and that's a feeling repressed stance. And so that's exactly it. The feelings are an obstacle to getting what you want. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you look at what we said at the beginning, which is, I think 3, 6, and 9, yes, you have the hurdle of doubling down on one center, but you can kind of choose and move through them faster. Man, yes, 9 is the stress move for 3s, but I think that 3s tend to avoid solitude and introspection because of the uneasiness within. So they would rather engage with others and draw from 6 than just stop and go inside.
Yep.
So if you look at the 3 being able to grab either one, I envision 3s pulling for 6 more than pulling for 9, because it means stopping. Don't want to do that. And it means looking inside, and there's uneasiness within, and emotions that have been negative emotions that they've disconnected from, but not gone back to process.
Yeah. Real obstacle for 3s here, that their motive is going to almost train them not to get what they need from their stress number and their stress move. And that's worth naming 3s. And it's worth saying that it's not a failure if you pause and retreat. It's a necessary part of the balanced, healthy life.
And I know we're not to 1s yet, but Jeff, I wonder how much that happens with 1s as well.
Sure.
Because it is clear to me that 8s, 1s, and 3s, we all process with action. And our stress move, which is the move we need to take care of ourselves, are the doing last numbers. So yours is 4, mine is 5, 3s is 9. Do you recognize that in yourself, that you would rather not stop?
Yeah, let me answer that twofold. One, that was also what was hitting me, is that for these action processing numbers, their stress move is into withdrawal. And I think that's so important here conceptually for me. I don't know if this is true of 3s as well. I suppose what I associate withdrawal with is the feeling, the intuitive feeling of stress, which I don't like. And so that getting comfortable in introspection, getting comfortable in those spaces of wrestling through what has happened emotionally in my past is almost inseparable from a feeling of stress for me. And so I need to name that. If I'm going to actually do work, especially on if I'm going to do work on my past, I'm going to have to figure out doors into that space. I don't feel, well, I do feel bad on the one side of not feeling good, of not feeling like morally good, as it were. Like my past is colored with moral failures. When I conceive of my past, it's harder for me to access those places of victory, of joy. In my past, it's harder for me to elevate. This is what my wife is fantastic on this front. My wife, who is a 3, can elevate 20 things that have happened in my past that are worthy of celebration. And half the time, she's really repainting them to look way better than they actually were. But to be honest, I don't care. I let that wash over me and bathe in that for a minute. So that would be that move for me.
Well, I love that we've starting with 2s, we talked about that 4 move for both of you, because when you look at where the rest of us get logic, every other type has a line to 5 or 9. So even 3, so when we go inside, that there's logic there. That's where we can get logic. I can understand that for a 2 and a 1, your pulling inside is not logical, it's emotional. And that's not a fun place, whether it's stress or secure. It's not a terribly fun place, right? Because it'd be nicer to pull inside and live in Jeff's world for a minute, which is what your wife gets to do, right? When she does take the time. I mean, in TJ's world, when you get to pull in a 9 and get some logic there. But yeah.
Yep. It's a real common pairing, 1s and 9s, probably in part because of that. Last words on 3s?
Learn to stop. I mean, I think when we hit you and I too, I think if you're processing with doing, you have to pay attention to your stop. I think we all do if we're not a stop number, but it offers us something very important.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about the a big chunk of the time that y'all have been talking. I've been thinking about 3s and avoidance, and I think that a lot of 3s pick up a skill at 9 that they don't use for their good. They use for efficiency's sake or doing sake or image sake. It's not just avoiding for internal processing, but it's also avoidance of, like we mentioned, 3s don't want to have the emotional processing conversation with someone. Oh, I can see that you are not doing well. I don't want to talk about it, but I want you to know that I see it. And the avoidance, like that, pulling from that 9 space of, oh, I can't do this right now. Like there's a way to communicate that something is important while doing behavior. It shows that it's clearly not important. So like avoiding having those harder conversations, I think part of that is a skill picked up at 9. Avoiding there's something there about the way that 3s can use their feeling gifts to sort of engage and showcase this image and then pull back in order to not be stuck in the mud there.
Because they don't trust their feelings. They trust their doing.
Yeah.
That's something I definitely say with you 3, 6s, and 9s, where it underscored for me that I was on the right track with where you shift. Is it's abundantly clear that 3s trust their doing more than the other 2 centers, feeling or thinking.
Yep.
TJ, you trust your thinking more than your doing or feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And 6s trust their feeling.
Yep.
And I hear them say they trust their gut, and they're not a gut type.
Oh, yeah.
But it's trusting their heart and their feeling, and they do. They absolutely do.
I had meant to say this. Some of us might think that the 3 feels, our feeling and then moves on. It's worth noting they are also internally repressing their own feelings as well in that moment, because of course shows of emotion are unbecoming and do not exude thriving or succeeding in the world in the minds of many 3s. And so that is a both ways. The 9s, 6s, and 3s, that emotion is going both ways. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we talked about 2s. The 2s don't feel their own feelings; they feel your feelings. The 3s don't feel their own feelings, but they also don't feel yours because they've put up a barrier that similar to 9s of not wanting to be impacted by your feelings so that it doesn't get in the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you carried that into rounded out the triad, I think it's very difficult for 4s to feel anything other than their own because there's such a movement there. Yeah. I don't want to leave 3, 6s, and 9s without observing that. I've heard the language, and I know I've heard it from my mom. I don't know if it started with her, where when you do bring up that repressed center, so when 3s, 7s, and 8s bring up feeling, when 1s, 2s, and 6s bring up thinking, when 4s, 5s, and 9s bring up doing, that it's been kind of tucked away from the world and repressed, that there's something really authentic and great there. And I acknowledge that and agree. I almost take it another step further. I think at that 3, 6s, and 9s, because it's your home base and you're getting back to your home base, I think there's something, and Jeff, that's what it made me think of when you were talking about, threes initially, what they see and don't see. I think when they do some inner work, I've always said, I think threes, Enneagram work is the most difficult for threes because looking inside and slowing down is just, they're literally not wired to do it. But if you get a healthy three who's really doing that internal work, they are so impactful because they can connect on the relationship level and do something about it in a way that I don't think any other type can.
Yeah. I fully agree there. It's human beings fully alive often are seen when they're really engaging their repressed center. Like just to bring back twos, when twos get in touch with their ability to reason through things, they are some of the most unique thinkers there are, in my experience, and just
Mine too.
lavish insight. It's the relational wisdom that comes out often from that clan, that just real valuable. I love the idea of the barrier that I think with processing center, you hit for 3 6s and 9s, the processing center kicks in and the barrier emerges to their home. That as you were talking, that's what was going through my mind. It's almost like, when you swallow, your throat closes up so that it doesn't. It feels like that sort of thing. It's like I've brought in the world, and then the barrier hits.
Thumbs up. I like that. Yeah.
And I also love the idea that there's something rich about the image of wanting to return home. I saw The Wizard of Oz. There's no place like home. This is where you're supposed to be. It was like, click your heels and get there. That's all. That's the move. Fours process with feeling. We talked about this. And as has been noted, where twos energy and radar is really external, it's flipped for the four. In their processing with feeling seems to me a very internal processing.
And they're unique along with fives, where their processing and support centers are the same center. So while twos get to take in and process with feeling, but then they support it with action, you shift down to fours, and their line to two means that they take in and process with, how does this make me feel?
Oh, you're doing processing now with their head. You're saying that the four is processing with two space, as it were?
No, I think they process with four, but I think they support with two.
That's what I mean.
don't. Yeah.
You wouldn't say that the support center for the four is 5. Okay.
I absolutely would not. And so that's new. And I think we might have talked about this before, but that is for sure. I think there's only 2 ways where I'm really saying, okay, standing independent from what's been said. And renaming it as stances is one of them. And the other is, I don't ascribe to the understanding that one center is dominant, one's repressed, and so the third center is magically the support center. I don't think that's true, because in my understanding of the thinking center, logic, and the feeling center, subjectivity, you literally you don't have any more of a juxtaposition there. It's very clear. And I don't believe logic can support emotion, and I don't believe emotion can support logic. And so what has historically been said is, okay, fours, we get to fours and they're doing last and feeling first. So thinking has to support their feelings.
And it's just right
and
there.
And so the language is, so they feed their feelings and they think about them. All true. Remember, the way I teach is mental energy doesn't mean you're drawing from the logic center, from the thinking center. Just because you're thinking about it doesn't mean you're looking at it logically and objectively. And I don't think fours ever look at their fluctuating emotions with objectivity.
I would love to pitch how we've come to this and tease out where the not the disagreement, but like there's adversarial energy here, but where you would pivot. Our language has been that fours feel their thinking and that fives think about their feelings. in terms of how they're coming to the world. Is that a misstep in your mind?
I don't find it to be accurate. So
Yeah.
I have a 17-year-old, he'll be 18 next month, who is a 4. And it is so clear to me that he's all about relationships and very much in the ways that my 2 mom is. And his mental energy, once he pulls out of himself and being withdrawn and feeding his own emotions, it doesn't go to objectivity. It goes to relationships. How do you feel about me? How do I feel about you? How are we doing? It's abundantly relational and feeling focused. And his mental energy is never on theory and logic. I mean, 4s love, I think they're philosophers almost naturally. But again, where that philosophy is in relationships and feelings and emotion. And on the flip, not to go too far, but just to show you the other side with 5s, jump across. People have said, well, 5s are thinking first and doing last, so feelings have to support their thinking. And my mom has taught. So if you disagree with a 5, they don't like it. They can be emotionally invested because they're emotionally invested in their thinking. I've been around too many 5s to see that if you disagree with a 5, they're not emotionally invested. They'll just dismiss you and think you're an idiot. You didn't show me the logic in this because I've got double logic around it. And so there is no emotion there. And there's not a read of people. Like, in order to reach a 5 on a relational level, you're never going to do it with feelings. You're going to do it with theory and discussion and objective reason. And then they'd love that relationship with you from there, because it's not asking them to provide something that they don't intuitively have to provide.
I love this angle. I'm just to jump in. I'm sticking presently with where I'm at. My experience.
Stick there.
Just to kick a personal experience back your way. What's your read on this? I have a brother who's a 4. I have a child that's 5. My brother feels his thinking about what has happened, like the thinking side of things. I can see it being a feeling relational secondary center on one front, but he has beliefs about what has happened in his family, and he feels deeply about those beliefs, and he can articulate those beliefs, and they're not necessarily kicked out emotionally. Like, I'm feeling my sadness, but I'm feeling you rejected me. And you rejected me is the belief that has occurred. With my
all I see is mental energy around the relationship.
Right. Similarly, I suppose in my head, and I see that. Similarly with my youngest, they are presently experiencing, like, it's not panic attacks, but it's like existential dread. They've come to these places where they're really thinking hard about what's going on in their internal life and their emotional lives as they have kind of nihilistic musings, as it were, and and I suppose that's how I conceive of what's going on there, is that they're thinking hard about their feelings, almost like the feelings are something, it's an object
Objective
outside
and
of
theoretic.
themselves. Yeah.
If you ascribe to what I think, then you cannot point to anywhere on the Enneagram where feeling supports thinking, or where thinking supports feeling.
Right.
They're switched. They're all intermixed with doing, because you can go either way there. Feeling supported by doing supported by feeling. But if you look at it, 4 and 5 would have been where that messes up, and I think it holds true. I think it is impossible to support subjectivity and emotion with logic, and I think the reverse is equally impossible. I think you cannot support logic with emotion.
Right.
It's not logical.
And good news, the Enneagram symbol is definitely geared toward your way of thinking, and so I'm going to lose this one as normal. But
I was just going to insert some thoughts as the resident logician. The symbol, like the existential gap down there at 4 and 5, like this makes so much sense of, like, everywhere connects to all the other And then you get 2 and 7, and 7s can't get to emotions, and 2s can't get to feelings. And this is the only place where that happens. Like, there is clearly a separation there between thinking and feeling. And like, as I spend more energy thinking about this, like there is a difference. There has to be a difference between logic and mental energy. Like, this idea of thinking, processing is not about how our mind goes. It's about the way that we see the information, the way that we observe whatever's happening. And then the feeling space is a totally different space. And you can think about your feelings, but it's not logic. It's a different kind of way to understand feelings, and it's mental energy. So then the 4 who has firm beliefs about the way that they have been treated in their family, it's not logic based. It's not observational based. It's emotionally based. Even those firm beliefs are still not logic and observation. It's an emotional, mental flag he's sticking his flag in this place, but it's all about the emotional place. It's not about observation and logic.
It's passion versus reason.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at 4 and 5, 4s represent passion, 5s represent reason. Mm-hmm. And never the twain shall meet.
And then, like, I think we'll talk about this more once we get over to 5s, but like the kind of, let's call them existential crises that a 5 might have, it's tied with anxiety. And I don't think that a lot of anxiety is necessarily relational. I think it is more to do with the mental process.
To take that further, I think when 5s do experience anxiety, it's because of it surrounds being relational, because they don't have a line there.
Sure.
You know? And if you look at 4s, you got to do the same thing with 4s, like I said with 2s. If you look at and understand, they don't have a line to thinking. They don't.
Right.
2s make up for it. I think 2s fool themselves and others that they thought something through because of the confidence behind their doing. I think that independence that they have in 8 does that for them. Well, 4s are the only type on the entire Enneagram who have no connecting line to 3, 7, or 8. So that lack of independence is very interesting. And so what they do is it's what am I feeling in 4, supported by what are you feeling in 2, and then their reach is doing, it's 1. And I believe the 4th step for 4s is routine. When they can engage in the mundane of routine and just doing what 1s kill it at is routine, right? And when my 17, almost 18-year-old, when my senior in high school is in his routine, his grades are terrific. He's just, it's like the 4th step for him for logic will not come when he's succumbing to his internal fluctuations. But when he sticks to a routine and he's handling the baseline doing, then he's a very deep thinker, and a deep thinker who can reach logic. But it's a 4th step for him, like it is a 4th step for 2s in my view of it.
You want to talk about that healthy move? This is the most common question I get from 4s who are actually doing Enneagram work, has to do with getting into their body. What would that entail? Or what are how do you initiate habits in those ways? What's wisdom there for 4s?
It's what Billy calls baseline doing. Like, you have to be routine. I think 5s, 4s, and 9s, all withdrawing types, benefit from routine in different ways. I think for 4s, it gets them out of their heart. And just the rote doing. Like, same thing, I know where that's coming. And honestly, where I talk about it and have taught it in the past is I worked with a 4 for 15 years. We were our jobs were similar, so we worked side by side for a long time. And when we started working together, I would have sworn he was a 1. He was very meticulous about everything, lots of lists. I noticed his Google Calendar was completely full all the time. Even sleep had its space. And we were working together as I was literally raising my child. And I started noticing that Will, my 4, doesn't do well when plans change and wants to know the plan and wants to know what's coming in terms of schedule. And I think that's where 4s intuitively lean into their secure space. When they are healthier and sticking to a schedule, what it does when they know what's coming and they stick to that, they have that extra energy, because they have lower energy anyway, to manage the fluctuating emotions. So if that makes sense, I think 4s stumble upon it in little ways when they're sticking to a schedule. And as children, they kind of are on one, and when you keep them on one, because it frees up mental energy to maintain those fluctuations that are coming without them knowing. You know, the only thing that's sure is that they're never going to be sure what they feel. That's going to come and go, right?
Last thoughts on 4s?
I know Jeff still isn't on board, but I think you fixed it for me. This solves some things that I've been struggling with logically.
Just makes sense.
I'll think about it.
That's my tagline. It just makes sense.
It just makes sense.
That's not an argument. That's value judgment. Anyway, the 5s. I thought that was funny. Neither of them did.
I did.
5s, as was said, 5s are going to process with thinking, and we can play that out again. They're going to double down on thinking. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like to separate double down and hold that just for 3s, 6s, and 9s, because I think it's a different kind of feeling for 4s, and it's 2 different kinds of feeling for 4s, and it's 2 different kinds of thinking for 5s. I think
Fair.
4s, like I said, go from what do I feel, and they support that with what do you feel, and where's our relationship, gauging that all the time. 5s go from what do I think about this, and these are my thoughts that I'm not sharing with anyone. So we mentioned that I've updated the terms for the stances, and we spent a good amount of time in the last podcast talking about why I think independent is a better name over aggressive for 3s, 7s, and 8s. And again, why we all think that responsive is a better name for 1s, 2s, and 6s over dependent. Well, I think withdrawing is a terrific term until you look at what happens when they go inside, when 4s, 5s, and 9s do retreat inward, because 3s, 7s, and 8s look similar even as they're standing independent. 1s, 2s, and 6s look similar even as they're responding to the world. 4s, 5s, and 9s, once you pull inside, your internal terrain is so different that I think solitary is a better term to honor once you pull inside those differences between 4s, 5s, and 9s. And if you carry that out, 5s thinking is solitary. And what I say solitary ultimately means is, for all of us, whatever is solitary, it's whatever goes before that is it's mine and mine alone. You can't influence it, and I'm not going to share it with you. And that's 5s thinking to start with. That's their home base. TJ, just to carry that to you as a 9, because you're in the solitary stance, that's your doing. Mm-hmm. It literally doesn't occur to you to offer to someone what you're planning to do.
Oh, yeah. No way.
In all those ways.
Yeah.
And it doesn't occur to a 4 to share their feelings, because who could even hold all of that? And it doesn't occur to a 5 to share what they're thinking. It doesn't. But then when you add that 7, that's when they come out and they're willing to share. And it's independent thinking, so you still can't influence it, but they're much more transparent about it. That's how I view it.
I'd love to back up for 2 seconds. This has been the question on my mind since we spoke last, is the idea of being independent and being internal seems to me very similar in nature. How would you move through those two ideas, to show their difference?
Excellent question. And I'll just answer it with all three. Anything, when you put solitary in front of it, it's I'm not sharing it, so it's not transparent, and it cannot be influenced. Okay? When you put responsive in front of it, so Jeff, that's your doing, it's my feeling, because that's my line to two. When you put, and it's TJ, it's your thinking. Mm-hmm. When you put responsive in front of it, it's transparent and it can be influenced.
Right.
Okay, your doing can be influenced. TJ's thinking can be influenced. I did it today already. And my feelings can be influenced. And when you put solitary in front of it, you don't get either one. No transparency and no influence. So the big difference in independent and solitary is independent means you're willing to share it. You have no problem being transparent about it.
Okay.
But neither can be influenced.
Those are helpful categories. That's rich.
Thank you.
Well done. Thoughts on fives? Teach.
I'm curious what the fourth step is for fives. Is it still routine?
I think fives use action on behalf of others to show that they care. Okay. And because that's already hardwired into them, the relationship comes after the action on behalf of others, whether it's supporting your agenda, doing something for you. I was just with a client, and she was talking about her dad, who's a 5, who was just honored in their town for like doing all these things. And of course, he doesn't want to be honored and thinks all the things, right? All that's ridiculous, the pomp and circumstance. But it's such a beautiful way to look at the reality that 5s are not going to be warm and fuzzy and tell us they love us. They're going to show us. Mm-hmm. And I think once a 5 gets there, they open up their heart more, if that makes sense. Once they get to the doing for others, I think that's where relationship stems from for the majority of 5s who are naturally socially awkward, right? That's because of that lack of a line. And in all the ways we looked at 4s and said, they have no line to thinking, but they also don't have an independent line. Well, 5s are the only other number who doesn't have a line to something. And they are the only type who have no connection to 1, 2, or 6. So responsiveness is not hardwired into them. And when you see it in their doing, I think that's what helps them engage with others, which would be the 4th step for them.
It's sort of like 4 setting up a routine means they don't have to use their thinking space to get to doing, and 5s in the doing don't have to use their feeling space to get to doing, but once they get there, they have the feeling space.
Absolutely. And I find 5s to have an incredibly large capacity for service on behalf of others. They don't want to be recognized for it. They don't want to talk to you while they're doing it. They want to just quietly behind the scenes, do it. And that's when you look at not having responsiveness hardwired into you. I think that's one of the most beautiful places on the Enneagram where we can have some compassion for 5s. I think 5s, in a lot of the ways that 8s are misunderstood, I think 5s are as well. But while I can reach responsiveness, 5s don't have it to reach for. Mm-hmm. And so if a 5 is being responsive, they have consciously chosen that path. Mm. For the rest of us, it was hardwired in. The rest of us all have a line to 1, 2, or 6. So in whatever way we're being responsive, that was already part of our hardwiring. 5s choose it. And I think that's just beautiful, ultimately.
All of that strikes me as intuitively correct. I have two things that hit me here. One is just in terms of my own note taking, going back, I'm real interested in listening back through this podcast with an eye towards security numbers. I feel like we have a robust understanding of the stress move, and the security move is thinner, but this fills in some of the girth that I suppose I think ought to be there if this is a place for balancing. So as you're talking, I'm very excited to go back with that in mind. Another place that doesn't have a lot of girth for me, but I would love your response here, is our use of wings. Because with both the 4 and 5, I normally discount wings and kind of set them aside as, they just make things messy in my mind. But as you're speaking,
I agree.
The move for both 4s and 5s potentially to shore up that void, the independence for 4s and the responsiveness for 5s can be grabbed hold of in one of their wings. So the 5 can grab hold of responsiveness in 6 space, and 4s could grab hold of independence in 3 space in theory. And I was hoping for your thoughts on that.
Well, I share much of your sentiment about wings being a distractor from doing real work.
Yeah.
And that being said, I think and have found that the majority of 4s who identify a wing, because you may not have a strong one either way, is a 3. Mm-hmm. And the majority of 5s who identify a wing, it's a 6 wing. I think it's unique to span that space at the bottom. I always think of my mom's teaching. She says, Thomas Merton, and I did some research. I've heard my mom say 100 times, Thomas Merton, self-identified 4 with a 5 wing, published in every language on the planet. And I love that. That sounds so great. Like I've said that to my child because we saw early on that he has a 5 wing for sure. That kid. And if you can imagine being raised by me, being a 4 child, when he was like 12, I was like, look, bud, let's have a real conversation. You want to be a D1 athlete. And that's likely not going to happen because you don't have an abundance of natural talent and you don't have a 3 wing that's going to kick in and help you do. You're like doubly withdrawing. However, Thomas Merton was published in every known language. Like that stuck with him, right? Well, every known language, that's a lot of languages, right? But he is like published in probably the most known languages, I would say. So I think that spanning is unique, if that's to be said also. I can't speak to Will because he doesn't have a 3 wing, but because I guess what I'm trying to say, Jeff, is I think that's too many. It's trying to pull in too much. I don't think the wing has that much influence. So I don't believe that 5s can get responsiveness from 6.
Influence
and I
or
don't believe
power.
that 4s can get independence.
Like influence, or it seems to me like that's more of a tool or even a power to grab hold of if it's there. But is that what you're saying? Like it's just not available.
I don't think it's available. I don't think you can get. I don't think you can get something that you're discussing unless you have a line to it. I don't think you can get it just from being next to you.
Right. Line being stress and security moves.
Yes.
Yep. Thoughts, Steve?
I also, that my big line is that the wings are simultaneously way less important and also more important than we really give them credit for, but like in the way that like this a chocolate chip cookie without chocolate chips is not a chocolate chip cookie. So like me as a 9, without my 1 or my 8 wing, I'm not truly a 9 because like this is just part of who I am, but also they're not important enough for me to ever talk about. And yeah, I've wondered for a long time, like where do we draw the line, pun unintended, of the like what we can get from which places. Like if as a 9 I can get aggressiveness or independence from 8 and 3, like what's the value of having one over the other? Like where do we stop saying we can get all of the traits of one type from wherever they are, So like, do we get everything about 8 from our 8 wing the same way that I get everything about 6 from its 6 from the line to 6, and like so I like thinking about that in a way that like it has less influence than we've been given the opportunity to believe.
I think hardwiring is my language. I know I've said it plenty of times today. Hardwiring is your type and the lines you share. And I don't think wing is hardwiring. The way I have talked about it historically is it dresses you up. It's the clothes you wear, but it's not you, ultimately. It's going to dress up how you represent to the world, but it doesn't touch motivation.
Yeah.
I like that you bring up you specifically, TJ, and the 8 wing, because in the same breath that I always say wings aren't important, I do believe there are 2 spaces, especially when identifying your number, but then further. Like 9, I have found in my teaching one of the hardest, if not the hardest, beyond 6 to figure out your type confidently is a 9 with a strong 1 wing or a 1 with a strong 9 wing. Mm-hmm. For some reason, that just trips people up in the world. So I acknowledge that from when you're trying to figure out your type. Beyond that, I think the only place where a strong wing matters in your journey is if you are a 9 with a strong 8 wing, or a 4 with a strong, or a 4. How am I saying that? Sorry, a 3 uniquely with a strong 4 wing. Other than that, 9 with 8, 3 with 4. I don't think it matters much. And the reason it matters in those 2 places is you have dichotomously opposed motivations pushing up against each other. Mm-hmm. Right? So my dad is a 9 with a heavy 1 wing. My husband is a 9 with a light 1 wing. He leans a little. My sister has a very strong 8 wing. She looks different.
Sure.
People who she works with would not find her to be a 9. Most people would probably think she was an 8 or a more aggressive number. And my language that I love is I think 9s with a strong 8 wing, their 8 wing writes checks that their 9 butt doesn't want to cash. So she will jump into conflict. I mean, jump into it, because that's the dichotomously opposed motivations are enjoyment and relishing in conflict and avoiding it. Mm-hmm. Right? So she'll jump in, and then she's like, wait a minute, I don't want to do this.
Right.
And it's a energy thing too. She overcommits herself all the time. Mm-hmm. In the moment, she's like, her 8 wing says, yeah, I want to do that. And then she gets home and she's like, I don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
And then 3 uniquely with 4, you've got image and embrace image opposing image is death, right? And conformity is death. Mm-hmm. And so it's not going to change the motivation. My sister still avoids conflict. And it's not going to mean that a 3 with a 4 wing is going to not want to, it won't be image conscious. However, I think they're a little more aware. And I think the way they choose to be image conscious is a little less conformative. Yeah. But it's still image, and it's still, it's very interesting. So that's I think I went down a rabbit hole there. Sorry, but I just don't think wings. And all of that being said, I don't think my sister gets her independence from 8. I think she gets her aggressiveness from 8.
Sure.
But I think she gets her independence from 3.
Yeah.
For sure.
I like that.
Dichotomous motivations, y'all. That's a book title. That's a winner right there. That'll sell 4 copies. I love that idea. Hey friends, it would mean the world to us if you shared this with somebody you love, preferably a 4 or 5 who want to bombard me with all your emails about how Joey's right, about how feeling supports feeling and thinking supports thinking.
Or if you want to support Jeff, that's fine, but make sure you send them to Jeff and not to Joey, because she does not care.
She'll stand it.
Circle back to independent, at least stanced. As always, the music here is by The Collection and by the great Brian Claxton. You can check out our typing tool online at the Start Here podcast. And if you want to see our pop culture deep dives, those you can find at Movie Typing. And I suppose that's what I got. Joy, it is fantastic as always to have you.
It was the
setup for.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Sorry. You might say thank you. Thank you for having me. I love our conversations.
So do I. Lots of. I mean, it's giving me notes for the next 3 months of work for us. I mean, this is really just prep time.
And I listen to your follow-up podcast.
Oh, did
so, you know, if we ever need to revisit the whole you don't think determination is the right thing, then we can definitely
you know what? My schedule is free. Whatever you want to talk about. My opinions are, as were said earlier, can be changed. What was your language for this? I have it in my notes somewhere. Influenced.
They can.
My opinions are subject
Well, what's
to influence.
interesting, this is a great example of what I say. So follow it all the way through. So you are a responsive doer.
Uh-huh.
Your line to 4 means solitary feeling.
Mm-hmm.
As you well know, you keep all those internal things private. And your thinking is 7. So your thinking actually can't be influenced. So we may not be able to have a conversation.
But Joey, I'm a healthy human being who's
There you go.
open to growth. I deconstructed. I know how this works.
You might do something different about it, but I don't know that I'm going to be able to change your mind.
My young Christian Jeff going into grad school in the philosophy department with Oxford professors who just kicked the hell out of me. That helped me.
That'll
get to a
help.
spot
That'll
of-
help. There it
of
is.
getting used to. It's like the athlete who is told routinely by a coach, "You need to do this, and you don't have authority here." Maybe something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, because my doing's independent. You can't influence it. Right,
But you're still
right.
going to do push-ups.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I got. You got anything else, CJ?
I got nothing.
He's DJ Wilson. He's officially awesome. I'm Jeff Cook, and who you aren't just isn't interesting.